Let's dive into this history. The mountains do not stay silent. The wind came from the north, sharp-edged and scented with rust. It slipped like a knife through the high passes of Ulmer, curling around jagged stones and needled pines, tugging at cloaks and whispering of change. The last breath of summer clung to the mountains, but autumn was already stalking its prey. On a granite outcrop jutting from the cliffside, 3 figures stood against the dimming sky. Below them sprawled the great valley, a basin between mountains where 2 rivers twined like silver veins. Beyond, the land rolled into mist-shrouded plains, hazed by distance and memory. And there, rising in pillars too black, too deliberate to be morning fog, was smoke. Not one column, but many. Thick and organized. A lattice of smoldering gray that wove through the tree-line like the scaffolding of a siege. Driss crouched on the stone, his weight balanced like a beast in stillness. His dark eyes, narrow, feral, tracked the smoke with a stillness that made him seem carved from the very cliff. His cloak, patched and weather-worn, fluttered slightly in the wind. "They've begun," he muttered. His voice was gravel, low and used, distrustful of speech. Mikkel stood just behind him, his youth betrayed by the restless tension in his stance. A longbow slung over his shoulder, fingers twitching as if itching to draw. His jaw was set, but his eyes, wide and storm-hued, still carried the shine of belief. "That's smoke," he said. That's real smoke, isn't it?" Driss didn't answer. It was Steen who spoke, older, heavier in both body and silence. His beard was streaked with ash-gray, and a thick scar looped like a faded noose across his neck, vanishing into his collar. When he talked, it was with the careful weight of a man who'd learned speech could cost you breath, or blood. "It's not from Herder's fires," he said. "Not this many. Not this well-placed." Mikkel glanced at him, uncertain. "Then who?" "Engineers," Steen interrupted. "Laying foundations. Clearing ground. This is the first step before the legions come." He pointed with a gloved hand toward the valley. The smoke revealed the shape beneath it. Small figures moving in rows, lines of stone gathered at angles, trees felled with precise geometry. "They're marking a stronghold," he said. "A fort. They've got a map. And time. They're not leaving." Silence followed, heavy as the clouds pressing down on the peaks. Driss stood, finally. His movements were quiet, fluid, like wind shifting through trees. His gaze never left the valley. "They've chosen the pass," he said. "And now they're building a throat to choke it." Mikkel clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "We should watch. Learn what we can. There might be more coming." "No," Steen said, firm. "If they see us, they won't kill us. Not right away. They'll want to know who else knows. And they'll pull the truth from your bones." Driss turned slightly, his face unreadable beneath tangled hair. "We go through the Deadwater Pass. Tonight. We tell the elders." "The Deadwater?" Mikkel's voice cracked. "That trail's cursed. People vanish in there." Driss didn't flinch. "So will your village. If we don't speak." A gust of wind rushed up the cliff, carrying with it a sound faint and strange, hammer against stone, distant voices, the first echoes of industry defiling wild earth. And beneath it all, the heartbeat of the mountains, slow, steady, ancient. A moment passed, 3 men at the edge of history. Not warriors. Not yet. Just sons of the stone, children of hills and wind, facing a storm they never asked for. Steen's eyes glinted as he looked at the smoke again. "Tomorrow," he said, "the first trees will fall for their shields." Without another word, the 3 turned and began the descent, a narrow, twisting path into a cleft in the rock, where even sunlight struggled to reach. Moss slicked the stones, and the air grew damp as they dropped lower. Mikkel slipped once, but Driss caught him without looking. No one spoke. Behind them, the smoke rose still, silent and certain, curling into the sky like a dark omen. Above, the mountains loomed like watchful gods, their silence unbroken. The earth knew before they did that everything was changing. And far below, beneath the soil and stone, old things began to stir. The sun had already slipped behind the high crags when they reached the edge of Holmer. Evening cloaked the village in copper and shadow, and the wind, thinner here among the upper reaches, whispered through the pine-beamed roofs and stone-walled paths with a cautious hush. Holmer clung to the mountain like a nest to a cliffside, built not to be found but to endure. The houses, wooden ribs wrapped in stone, rose close together, their windows narrow slits, their doors carved with runes no one remembered how to read. The paths were steep, winding like veins between the homes, and every soul who lived here had legs of iron and hearts tempered by silence. Driss, Mikal, and Steen entered without fanfare, their boots brushing gravel and moss. It was the children who saw them first, high up on a ledge, a group tossing pebbles at a goat bell, and they stilled, like birds sensing a hawk. One boy, eyes wide, called down without thinking, "Those are the ones who walk above the eagles." An old herder, stooped from winters and weight, stepped into view, his voice a hushed prayer. "Steen returns, or is that his shade?" No one spoke to the three, but doors creaked open. Curtains shifted. Shadows leaned forward. There was something in their silence that made noise unnecessary. But what they carried, that would soon break every hush. At the heart of Holmer, just above the cliff ring basin they called the Bowl, stood the ancient stone. Taller than two men, weathered and lichen-bitten, it bore a round hollow at its crown, the Oko of the ancients. Through it, one could see only sky and peak. No valley. No outsiders. As it had been for generations. Around it, the gathering circle formed. Stones for sitting, fire for light, and silence for lull. Elders. Blacksmiths. Woodcutters. Hunters. No warlords, no nobles. Just those whose hands bore calluses, and whose eyes had learned to measure men the way they measured snow before a storm. Driss spoke first. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "They are building," he said. "Not tents. Not trade posts. Foundation stones. Aligned with the slopes. Cut with precision." He turned to the hollow of the stone, the Oko. As if speaking into it, not to the crowd. "They're staying." Mikal stepped forward, eager despite the tension. "We know the gullies. The switchbacks. We can trap them. Lead them off paths. We—" "Enough," said a voice like a splitting log. Tana, oldest among them, tall and brittle as dry pine. His hair white, his shoulders still wide. His staff marked the earth with quiet finality. "Rome is a river," he said. "It cannot be held back with branches and rock. We have moved before. We can move again. Farther. Deeper. There are still mountains left." Before the murmurs could spread, a woman's voice cut across the stone ring like flint on steel. "Move where?" said Brea, her cloak black as ravens, her fingers thick with calluses from blade and loom alike. "Beyond the clouds? Shall we birth children on cliff faces? Will granite cradle them when we're gone?" The ring shifted. Some looked down, others at the fire. Then Steen stepped forward. He had been quiet too long, the mark on his neck hidden beneath a scarf. Now, he pulled it down and let the scar gleam red in the firelight. "I've seen Rome," he said, voice rasping from places deeper than memory. "I wore their chains. Slept in their dirt. Their cities are not made for those who run." He looked at Tana. Then Brea. Then all of them. "There is room only for those who kneel. Or those they hang." Silence. Thick. Heavy as snowfall before an avalanche. Then Driss, standing now with his back to the ancient stone, said, "We're not a legion. We're not an army. We are the earth. This place. If it remembers us, if the stone remembers, we must not abandon it. Let us not fear dying." He paused. "Let us fear doing nothing." For a time, no one answered. Then, Brea's voice again, softer now, but steel still beneath it. "Start with the ground. Pits. Warnings. Listen before we shout. Let the mountains speak first." There was no cheer. Only slow nods. The kind that mean acceptance without hope. Agreement without faith. The three, Driss, Mikal, and Steen, were granted help. Not warriors. Not trained. A potter's apprentice, still with clay under his nails. A goatherd, silent and sure-footed. Two boys, not yet men, with eyes too eager and hands too small for blades. Someone chuckled darkly. "This is our army?" Mikal, grinning despite himself, replied. "No. This is a shadow you can't catch." Behind them, the Oko watched. Unblinking. Waiting. The wind stirred again. The air was tight, like lungs before a scream. In Homer, even the silence was sharp. Because in the mountains, even the wind hesitates before the storm. Dawn did not rise in the forest, it crept. Low and slow, like a wounded thing, it seeped between the twisted trunks and heavy boughs of the old woods near the White Cypress Gorge. The trees here were older than names. Their bark curled like clenched fists, their limbs knotted by centuries of wind and silence. Moss clothed them thickly, and in the early light, it gleamed with dew sharp as shattered glass. Driss moved first, his steps silent, almost reverent. Behind him came the others, Mikal, the bowman with fire in his spine, Kern and Lay, the twin boys whose eyes still danced with both fear and thrill, Ivan, the potter, unfamiliar with forest silence, and Olin, the young goatherd whose calm, sure movements mimicked the mountain animals he'd spent his life with. None of them spoke. Not because they were told not to, but because the forest didn't allow it. Here sound meant something. And something was always listening. They spread out beneath the old canopy. Work began. Driss guided them in gestures, not words. He showed them how to carve and bury the death shovels, boards honed to razor points and hidden under a blanket of leaves. Mikal and the twins stretched trip lines between trunks, low and cruel. Olin dug shallow pits, camouflaged with moss and ferns. But it was Driss's craft that stilled the air. Near a clearing, beneath a tangle of roots, he built the voice of the tree. A cluster of sticks, bound with thread, balanced with delicate pressure. A branch rigged to snap when trodden, dragging a carved reed across a hollow log. The sound it made, tested briefly, was unnatural. A croaking whistle, like a wolf choking on its last breath. Mikal watched, eyes narrowed. To frighten them? Driss shook his head. Not to scare. To make the trees seem alive. Thinking. He crouched, adjusting a tension line. You win not when you kill a man, but when he cannot sleep in the dark. When the leaves speak his name. The twins exchanged glances. Even Ivan, who'd once mocked the stories of spirits and bark, now handled branches with care. But by midday, the forest itself gave back a whisper. Kern returned first, pale and wide-eyed, motioning urgently. I saw someone. The group followed, slow and silent, skirting ferns and thorn-rooted shrubs. From behind a fallen pine they watched. 3 figures. Cloaked, unarmed. Not soldiers. No armor. No blades. They walked with purpose, marking trees with charcoal and strips of cloth. One held a taut string and paced slowly, measuring. Another unrolled a scroll, a map, unmistakably Roman. Cartographers. They're scouts, Mikal whispered. Prepping the way. Not yet Legion, Driss said. But behind them comes the storm. Mikal's hand moved to the hilt of his knife. We end them now. Driss didn't blink. No. If they vanish, Rome sends 10 more. Armed. He crouched, eyes glinting like whetstone. Let them flee on their own. That night, the forest spoke. The wind was low, the stars smothered by fog. But beneath the black canopy, hidden mechanisms groaned to life. The first branch snapped. The reed screamed. Then another. And another. Wolves? Spirits? Something worse? To the cartographers, it didn't matter. Their campfire overturned in panic. Oil spilled. Lanterns shattered. They ran, stumbling over trip lines, gasping at the sigils carved in red on bark, ancient symbols that meant the hunter's curse in tongues long buried. and in their flight the wind stole from them a precious thing. A map. The parchment fluttered across the brambles, caught on a broken root. Mikhail retrieved it, unrolling it in the morning mist. Ink blurred. But not enough. Driss's brow tightened. 5 marked paths, safe corridors through the mountain. One of them led straight to Homer. They already know too much, he muttered. But around them, the air began to shift. Something had changed. They hadn't drawn blood. No Roman died that night. But the trees had spoken. And Rome, for the first time, had listened. Kern and Lay grinned, their faces smeared with dirt and pride. Did you see how they ran? Lay laughed. Like hares from thunder. Olin knelt beside one tree, brushing moss from the blood-marked sigil. He broke a small twig bearing the sign, tucking it into his coat. A token, he murmured. For luck. Mikhail, arms crossed, watched the mist settle. Fear is good. But it's not enough. Driss didn't respond. But in his eyes something smoldered, not fear, nor joy. A beginning. A first blow struck not with sword, but with silence. A wound that bleeds only in the mind. The voice of the tree had spoken. And it would not go quiet again. The evening light did not fade, it fled. As the sun sank behind the peaks, a strange stillness settled over Homer. Not the calm of peace, but the hush of waiting. As if the stones themselves were holding breath. The warmth of the day had vanished with the light, and in its place came a sharp wind, one that smelled faintly of pine smoke. But it wasn't from their chimneys. The smoke came from somewhere else. Driss and his group returned just before full dark. 6 shadows cresting the upper ridge, moving like ghosts down the narrow path into the square. Dirt-smeared, silent, eyes darker than when they'd left. Mikhail held the map tight in his hands, creased and smudged from nervous fingers. Kern and Lay, the twins, looked older somehow, though no time had passed. Ivan the potter stumbled slightly, his boots not made for slopes, and Olin the goatherd walked behind, shoulders squared as if expecting an ambush. Driss came last, scanning rooftops, windows, the still forms that lined the village path. No welcome. No cheer. Only watching. At the circle, Brea and Tana stood side by side. Their faces caught the last red blush of the sky. Tana, unshaken as ever. Brea, arms crossed, lips thin with worry. They've fled, Mikhail said. The scouts. But they know the way now. One of the paths leads here. South slope, Driss added. They marked the approach. Their map had Homer in its shadow. Tana said nothing. He only looked at the mountains, as if measuring their silence. Then a voice rang out, raw and panicked. Where is my sister? Rita, a woman broad-shouldered and strong, now frantic, pushed through the gathering crowd. Her husband. The boys. They were south, at the hollows. They should have returned yesterday. Eyes turned. Brea stepped forward, but before she could speak, another voice murmured. Someone saw movement. Last night. Among the rocks. A cloak, dark, foreign. The whisper spread like frost on glass. Steen was the one to break it. There was a mine, he said, stepping into the light of the central fire. Old, narrow. Thought buried years ago. It runs beneath the village. I helped seal it once. He turned to Driss. If they found the mouth of it, we're no longer above them. We're sitting on their roof. There was no hesitation. Driss, Mikhail, and Steen left at once, no speeches, no torches. Just 3 men and 2 lanterns, walking into the teeth of the night. The mine yawned from the hillside like a broken jaw. Overgrown, half-choked with stone and moss, it should have been dead. But as they stepped inside, the air changed. This was no air of the living. Their lanterns cast long shadows on damp walls, flickering over rusted rail tracks and broken beams. The further they walked, the less the mountain felt like stone, and more like bone. Old, hollowed bone. Listening. Then signs. A torn cloth, caught on a branch. Faint traces of disturbed dust. And then the smell. Iron. Earth. Something sharper. They found the chamber tucked off to the side, a place once used to store tools. Now it held something else. The man lay against the wall, arms folded awkwardly. His eyes were open, mouth slack, throat cut with brutal precision. Not savagery, method. Mikhail knelt beside the body, fists trembling. That's him. The husband. Driss scanned the area. No signs of the others. They didn't die here, he murmured. They were taken. Steen leaned against the wall, his voice a rasp. These aren't common scouts. These are Rome's forward teeth, sick as shadows. Trained to strike first. To kill confusion into their enemy. Mikhail's jaw clenched. Then confusion ends now. No, Driss said, rising. This is only the beginning. They returned in silence, climbing the path back toward firelight. Holmer was no longer quiet. The villagers had gathered in full. Some held knives. Others clutched tools turned weapons. Fists white-knuckled around torch handles. There was no panic, only dread sharpened into resolve. Where are they? A voice demanded. One dead, Mikhail said. The others gone, Driss added. Taken. Or worse. Brea stepped forward, lifting her voice above the low growl of fear. Then we bury this path, she said. Saltpeter. Stone. Fire. Tana finally nodded. The mountain opens no more. They worked quickly. Saltpeter packed, fuse laid, stones stacked in warning. The explosion came like a thunderclap, a roar that shook dust from every rooftop and scattered birds from the pines. The earth swallowed its own mouth. Silence returned. But it was not peace. Driss stood near the smoke, his silhouette etched by firelight. This gives us 3 days, he said. Brea joined him. Then in 3 days, we rise, she finished. Or we burn. And the stars above, watching through a cloudless sky, seemed not to blink. The moon hung above the eastern cliffs like a blade, full, silent, merciless. Its pale light sliced through the stone teeth of the valley's edge, casting long, jagged shadows across the narrow goat trails. Here, the earth dropped into wind-scoured ravines and twisted ledges, where even the owls flew crooked. Perfect ground for watching. Terrible for fighting. They moved in silence, four shadows slipping among shadows. Mikhail led, his movements honed and steady. Behind him, Kern and Lay, the twins, stepped as one, lean figures with bows slung across their backs and nervous fire in their eyes. At the rear, Olin kept pace, nimble and quiet, though younger than the rest. Driss didn't want you here, Mikhail had told him. I'm a shepherd, Olin had replied. Shepherd, see. Now, not a word passed between them as they crawled along the upper ridge, each step tested, each breath measured. Then they saw it. Nestled in a hollow below, among broken boulders and crooked trees, the Roman camp glowed like a nest of embers. Roughly 24 tents, neatly arranged. A large fire burned at the center, illuminating a wide table. On that table, a map. Spread wide. Weighted with stones. Just scouts, Lay whispered. But that's a real map. They're not guessing anymore, Mikhail muttered. They're planning. They crouched in the rocks, studying the camp. The soldiers moved calmly, too calmly. No sentries in the trees. No extra patrols. They don't expect us, Kern said. Good, Mikhail replied. Let's keep it that way. Then Olin stiffened. Look! He pointed to a thicket off to the side, near the rear tents. In the half-shadow, someone sat on the ground, hands bound, shoulders slumped. Their cloak was torn, the fabric unmistakably local, homespun wool, mountain-dyed. The guard nearby spoke with another. A phrase drifted up. From the hills. Says he speaks both tongues. We'll take him at dawn. Mikhail's jaw tightened. Kern looked to him. What do we do? Mikhail didn't answer immediately. The wind shifted, cold and sharp. He stared down at the figure in the shadow, and for a moment, a flash of something. Not pity. Not fear. Resolve. We wait for deeper night. Then we take him. They did just that. Just before dawn, Olin crept wide through the trees and threw a stone into the far woods. It clattered loud, followed by the rustle of something running. The guards moved, not far, but far enough. Mikal and Kern slipped in, blades low. The prisoner flinched at first, but said nothing as Mikal cut his bonds. You walk? Mikal asked. A single nod. Then they ran, no words, no sound but boots on stone and breath in throats. They took the high trails, narrow and rough, where the moonlight fractured like broken glass. By the time they reached the hidden hollow near the falls, the sky was turning pale. The man sat beside the pool, hands trembling only slightly. You're not Romans, he said. Sharp, Mikal muttered. And you? The man exhaled. Name's Marcus Elder. My mother was Gallic. My father less kind. I've walked with legions. Spoken for them. Lied for them. Olin handed him water. Kern stood with his hand on the hilt. Why were you tied up? I stopped lying. There was a pause. I've seen the maps, Marcus continued. I've sat in war tents. There's a column coming, 6 days. 3 prongs coordinated. But worse, a flank-clearing unit will move first. 3 days from now. He reached to the ground, and with a finger drew lines in the damp sand. A fork. A valley. Symbols where the arrows split. The main host comes slow. The hunters come fast. Lay frowned. Why help us? Marcus stared into the pool. Because Rome has forgotten fear. You people, you still have it. That's why you might win. But if you wait, if you hesitate, they'll carve the mountain open. Kern stepped forward. He's lying. Or bait. Tie him again. He's tired, Olin countered. And telling the truth. I can see it. Mikal looked at both. Then at Marcus. Then at the map of sand. You're either our key, he said softly, or our noose. The wind stirred, blowing the sand map slightly, softening its lines. Like all things, fleeting unless used. The twins moved apart. Olin crouched closer to the prisoner. And Mikal? He stared into the distance, where the sun had not yet risen, and felt the weight of a new kind of choice settle on his shoulders. Not fight or flight, but faith. The sky had forgotten color. On the 4th day, one of the 5 before the reckoning foretold, the world stood still. No wind. No sun. Only heavy clouds stretched across the sky like a woolen shroud. The mountains, normally proud and sharp, now loomed as pale silhouettes, swallowed by mist. At the eastern pass, silence ruled. It looked abandoned. A relic of failure. The horn once meant to sound warning now lay cracked and half buried beneath rubble. The signal posts leaned crookedly, as though left to rot. Stones scattered the slope like discarded bones. It was perfect. From the far ridge, above the forgotten trail, movement finally stirred the mist. A line of iron and flesh advanced, shields glinting dully, faces hidden behind discipline. 15 men. 1 centurion at the lead, armored heavier than the rest. He walked like a man who had never lost a step in his life. Gaius Razonius. He was known in the outer provinces as the Edge. For him, thinking was weakness. Delays were worse. He believed in force, direct, unbending, cruel. As he scanned the crumbling pass, he laughed. This isn't a trap, he said to no one in particular. It's a prayer. Behind him, 2 scouts and a cartographer adjusted a scroll, marking the ridgeline. Advance, Brazonius ordered, motioning forward. The soldiers moved, careful, but not hesitant. They knew no fear. Not here. Not yet. Halfway into the pass, they reached a platform, a flat stretch of stone, carved by nature, framed by broken posts. One of the legionaries stepped forward, brushing past a weathered pillar. His boot clipped something. Ding! A hollow ring echoed, soft, metallic. Not quite a bell. Not quite silence. A moment passed. Then, the mountain exhaled. From beneath the platform, pressure snapped. Earth erupted. Saltpeter fire roared. Stone flew like hail. Sharpened stakes burst upward from hidden seams. There was no time for orders. Only screams. 2 soldiers died instantly. One torn apart mid-stride, the other thrown from the ledge. The cartographer vanished beneath a slide of rocks. Even Razonius, always armored, stumbled, his left arm struck by flying iron. His shield spun into the mist. Blood followed. Above, on a distant ridge carved into the mountain face, Driss watched through the narrow hole in the stone, the Oko's twin, unknown to outsiders. Beside him, Marcus exhaled. "They'll feel that," Driss said, voice cold. Marcus nodded. "He won't retreat. But he'll hesitate. And hesitation is time. You've bought a day." Driss didn't smile. He only watched as the Romans regrouped, dragging the wounded behind makeshift shields. There were no cheers in Homer. No one shouted victory. Because this wasn't that. This was warning. Below, the Romans began fortifying, laying palisades, planting banners, digging in. Then came the flag. A lone figure, robed and unarmed, walked up the slope, holding a white cloth threaded with red. A request. Not for surrender. For parley. The village gathered by the central stone. "What does it mean?" someone asked. "It means they don't know how deep our roots run," Brea said. "Or they want us to believe they're listening," added Mikal. Steen stood beside the hearth, arms crossed. "They'll come with words. And with swords behind them." Driss stepped forward. "We meet them." "You'd speak?" a voice asked. Driss shook his head. "Not as men who yield. But as stone that speaks only when struck." Brea nodded. "Let them learn that silence isn't emptiness. It's the sharp edge of waiting." That night, the village didn't sleep. They repaired traps. They moved stones. They reinforced paths and walls that hadn't mattered in years. But more than that, they stood taller. Not out of pride, but purpose. For the first time in memory, the people of Holmer weren't merely holding ground. They were shaping it. Razonius, bloodied but breathing, sat beneath a makeshift tent as a healer bound his arm. He stared at the pass. Then at the distant cliffs. "This isn't just a mountain," he muttered. "No, sir," one scout said. "It's watching." They called it a gray threshold, the space between action and retaliation, fear and defiance. Not peace. Not yet war. The bell had rung, but not for them. And that meant it would ring again, for someone else. The morning came dry and cold. No birds sang. No axes bit into wood. No children laughed in the alleys between the homes of Homer. Smoke curled from only a few chimneys, not for warmth or meals, but to keep away silence. At the center of the village, tied to the old message post where winter skins used to hang, stood a man. Marcus Elver. Neither one of them, nor entirely one of them. His wrists were bound, but not cruelly. His face bruised but calm. He stood with the stillness of someone who had already faced one death, and now waited only to see which mask it would wear this time. The villagers gathered in the square, shadows more than people, wrapped in thick coats and thicker judgment. Children watched from behind shuttered windows. Women held their husbands' arms tight, not to restrain them, but to keep them from vanishing into rage. Brea stepped forward. Her voice was sharp, but her gaze steady. "You speak because you want to live," she said, looking Marcus in the eyes. "But do you speak because you want us to live?" Marcus didn't flinch. He looked at her like someone who had stopped lying long ago. Then came Tana, old, stiff, unbending. His cane cracked the stone with every step. His voice was loud, but hollow. "This man speaks the tongue of Rome," he growled. "He's eaten from their hand. That makes him theirs." Mikal, standing near the edge of the circle, raised his voice. "He knows their timing. Their movements. He's not asking for trust, just to be heard." Steen, leaning against a post, arms folded, added grimly, "I've seen the inside of their camps. Translators are the last ones standing. They see everything. And remember. Still, the murmurs rose. Brea raised a hand. Then let the mountain choose. A hush fell. Heads bowed, shoulders tensed. The basket was brought out, an old ritual, older than Homer itself. A woven thing of pine root and goat hide split in two, one side marked with a swirl, the other a scar. The swirl, listen. The scar, let go. Each villager of age stepped forward. One by one. Silent. They placed stones. Some smooth, some jagged. Some heavy, others light. When the last was cast, the basket was lifted and counted. 8 for life. 6 for death. Brea looked at Marcus. We don't trust you. But we're not Rome. He only nodded. Later, in the hut where he was held, Driss entered. He didn't sit at first. Just stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Watching. Marcus met his eyes but said nothing. Until finally. You don't ask why I'm here? Driss stepped forward, silent. Then Saturday. No. I only care if you'll tell us when they're coming. Marcus's answer came without delay. 5 days. 3 prongs. One group will use the path you think is dead, the one with the rock slide. They've cleared it. It'll be quiet. They want to surprise you. Driss leaned forward. I believe you. Marcus tilted his head. But not all of them do. Then don't convince them. Convince the ground. And that's what he did. That same day, the village moved. For the first time, not out of fear, but purpose. Driss and Steen gathered the Earth Squad, not warriors, but survivors, stonecutters, potters, trappers, hunters. Even the children came, those quick of foot and clever of hand, with bells and twine for signals. They dug, set snares, crafted false paths and trails that circled back on themselves. Dead ends became inviting. Safety became illusion. Marcus, bound no longer, knelt in the dust and clay near the old kiln. He drew with sticks and fingers, etching terrain lines and markings he remembered by heart. He didn't speak unless asked. He didn't defend himself. He just worked. Elsewhere, Mikal led 2 boys, Tharn and Aiel, up the highest ridge. Each carried a horn. When they begin their march, Mikal told them, you blow. 1 to warn the village. 2 if they split. Tharn looked up. And if they see us? Mikal's jaw clenched. Then you blow. And you hold that horn like your life depends on it. Because it does. The air in Homer had changed. It pulsed. People no longer spoke in whispers, but in planning. There were still doubts, quiet, like a fever in the bones. But they had made a choice. They had given Marcus a stone. Not forgiveness. Not welcome. But a moment. And in the mountains, a moment could be everything. Still, as the day deepened and the dust began to rise from the first footsteps of preparation, a question lingered in Driss's mind. We gave him a chance. But in doing so, did we lose a piece of ourselves? That answer would come with the wind. With horns. With fire. The third night came with no moon. Fog crept low across the spines of the eastern pass, thick as wool, cold as steel. It coiled around stones and bones, smothering sound, muting breath. The long horns, forged of bone and bronze, strapped to the signal posts with mountain rope, loomed in the mist like sleeping beasts. And beside one of them, curled beneath a woolen cloak, sat a boy who'd wanted to see war. His name was Vel. 17. Eager. Too eager. He had dreamed of charging down slopes, of arrows loosed into legend, of fires reflected in iron. Instead, he sat alone, teeth clenched against the cold, staring into gray nothing. When the twig snapped behind him, he barely turned. Probably a fox. Or wind. He never made a sound. By morning, no signal had come. The watcher from the neighboring ridge waited past the hour of first light, then began his descent. He found the horn on the ground, still whole, but speckled with dirt and blood. A piece of Vel's cloak fluttered from a thorn bush nearby. On the stone beside the post, a smear of red. The wind stirred the fog, but not the silence. Homer learned the news by noon. They gathered again, not for words, but for the ache in their chests. A boy was missing. A horn had not sounded. That was all they needed to know. At sunset, as the sky turned a dull gold behind the clouds, a sound rang out. Not a horn. A bell. Low, metallic. A single strike. Like a hammer on an empty cauldron. Dull. Final. The people froze. Steen, standing beside the kiln, paled. "That's not ours," he said. "It's Roman. A signal disc. They strike it once when a path is clear." He turned slowly toward the east. "They think the pass is open, and that we are blind." The reaction was swift and jagged. Vel's mother cried out first, a sharp wail, like a tree split in frost. "You said he was safe. You said we'd fight for them. Where was your fight last night?" Mikal looked away. Brea stepped forward, her hand gentle on the woman's arm, but her face was stone. Then Driss spoke, voice low, but steady. "We're not gods. But we can make the mountain curse the ones who take from it." He looked to the east. "If they think we don't see, we'll let them walk into our shadow." The council gathered that evening under the Oko stone. Torches flickered in a windless square. Faces were tight, eyes rimmed red. Mikal wanted to strike. "Let's not wait. Hit them now. Before they climb." Brea stopped him with a single look. "That's not who we are. Rome pushes forward. We make the ground break under them." A plan formed, slow and sharp. They would leave the pass open. A temptation. The signal horn would be replaced by a rusted disc. If struck, it would ring loud, triggering a pressure pin below. Underneath, bags of saltpeter, sharpened stakes, and stones packed with tar. A trap dressed like a welcome. "If they want silence," Steen said, "we'll give them the kind that waits." Marcus, now moving freely but always watched, stepped forward with something in hand, a drawing scratched into hide. "A centurion leads the forward push. Caius Lurco. He doesn't believe in traps. Or stealth. Just speed." Driss nodded. "Then we make him the first to vanish." That night, the trap was laid. And the mountain waited. The eastern pass stood quiet under the clouded stars. No one spoke, but every soul in Homer felt its weight. Something had shifted. This was not fear anymore. It was anger. Not rage, but deep, settled wrath. The kind stone remembers. "Vel was a boy," Brea said quietly to Driss, as they stood above the pass. "He was," Driss answered. "He wanted to be part of it." "He is," Driss said. "They left a mark for him, not a stone, not a cross. Just his knife, set into the post where the horn had once stood. Still sharp. And near it, in the dirt, the lines of their plan buried beneath soft earth. They would not mourn forever. Now, they would make the enemy bleed for every step taken on what was once forgotten ground. Homer would no longer tremble. It would wait. And when the bell rang again, it would not be heard by the living. The stone terrace stood above the world like a memory carved into the mountain. Here, long before roads and iron, tribes once spoke in circles of fire and trust. Now, the old circles were faint, stones cracked and worn, moss curling at their edges, but they still pointed to the four winds. Still held the weight of decisions made by those whose bones had long become part of the slope below. And here, on the day after the mountain had bitten back, the people of Homer waited again. No one spoke as the man approached. He came alone, walking with the slow precision of one who had done this many times, and knew the power of silence. His cloak was light, almost silver against the gray sky. His hands were raised. A white cloth, folded perfectly, stitched with red thread, swayed in one. On his chest, the sign of the Legion, the golden eagle, wings spread, talons extended. His name was Florian Secundus. Not a soldier. A prefect. A diplomat of the sword. One who wore no weapon, but never needed one. From the side of Homer, 3 stepped forward. Brea, tall, steady, with eyes that had stared down avalanches. Steen, older, slower, but unshaken, the scar on his throat like a line crossed long ago. And Driss, who said little, but whose silence was a language the mountain understood. Florian reached the center of the ring and bowed slightly, not low enough to suggest humility, but enough to say he'd read their stories. "I come without arms," he said calmly. "Without threat. The Legion does not seek blood. It seeks land." He smiled, small and practiced. "Land without war is an agreement." Brea stepped forward, voice low but sharp. "Land that breathes does not sell itself. Land that remembers where our dead lie does not bow." Florian did not waver. "We offer you peace. We leave your home standing. You remain here, officially. Under law. Under protection. You serve, pay, build. And Rome ensures your children grow without fear." Steen's voice rasped like stones grinding. "I've seen your law. It wears chains and eats the names of the free." The prefect tilted his head. "And yet better chains that keep breath in your chest than freedom that ends in the dirt." Driss stepped forward now. The wind picked up, just enough to lift his cloak, just enough to tug at the flag in Florian's hand. His eyes locked onto the prefect's, and for the first time, Florian blinked. "I would rather fall with nothing," Driss said, voice low as mountain thunder, "than live with a key around my throat." He leaned slightly closer. "Tell your commander, we are not a tribe. We are stone. And every step you take on our land cracks the earth beneath your own feet." Silence. Then Florian spoke again, quieter. "Then you've made your choice." He turned. "I will return. But not to speak." He walked back into the mist the way he came, alone, upright, but slower. Behind him, no one in Homer moved. Even the wind dared not speak. That night, the message settled. There would be no more words. No more lines offered in ink. Only in blood. Steen sat beside the hearth, sharpening a knife slowly. "He wasn't just a messenger," he said. "He was a scout. Now they know we won't bow. And they know how few we are." Driss nodded once. Brea, standing in the doorway, added, "Then we give them one more thing to remember." Orders passed quietly. The quiet of planning. Not fear. They would not wait anymore. Traps were doubled. Trees rigged with ropes and burning pitch. Paths seeded with blades beneath the leaves. Ledges wired to collapse. Every child knew where to run. Every elder knew how to hold a knife. Marcus Elder worked in silence, redrawing a map from memory on clay slabs. For each path Rome might take, Homer prepared 5 false ones. Mikal, from the watch post, saw the first glint of shields the next morning. Still days away. But they were coming. The people of Homer no longer whispered. They spoke plainly, even when quiet. There was no shame in preparing to fall, as long as one stood first. The stone terrace remained empty. But the air above it felt heavier, not with dread, but with decision. They had chosen death, yes. But in doing so, perhaps they had stolen just a little more life. At the first light of the 5th day, the mountain did not breathe. It waited. The sky was a dull canvas, painted in ash and stillness. No birds stirred. No insects sang. Only the low hum of tension, like a taut string ready to snap, wove itself between stone, tree, and soul. Then came the footsteps. From the east they emerged, shields flashing in the pale light, banners half unfurled. A steady line, trained and unshaken, moving as one body with a single will. At their center rode engineers with iron tools, and officers with eyes like steel. From the south, through the narrow gorge, boots struck gravel in rhythm, 20 men abreast, their breath clouding like smoke. And from the north, hidden behind the ridges and thought long blocked, came the third wave, creeping like a shadow over broken paths, across the old trade route now barely remembered. More than 100. Disciplined. Armored. Commanded. They marched like a tide. But the mountain had prepared. In the southern gorge, the narrow throat between 2 cliffs, the first cries came. A soldier stepped on a stone that clicked. Then the sky fell. Above them, a ledge gave way, stone and lime, soaked and primed. It poured down like a white, choking wave. Eyes burned. Skin blistered. Men coughed, screamed, dropped weapons and shields. Some turned back. Others slipped in the chaos. 10 died before they could lift a hand. 6 crawled out, blind and howling. Above, a falcon soared, silent. They called it the wolf's maw. To the north, the forgotten bridge groaned as boots touched it. Its frame had been crafted by Homer hands, made to look old, but freshly carved inside. Hollowed at its core, held by brittle pegs. When the 5th man crossed, it cracked. Then collapsed. 5 plunged into the icy gorge. 3 more were caught in the rope traps hidden just beyond. Steel rang on stone. Screams echoed off the cliffs. From the watch post, a horn rang out. 3 strikes. Flank broken. The mountain was answering. Within Homer, no one ran. The villagers moved like veins beneath skin, silent, purposeful. Women passed jars of scalding sand to high points. Children dashed between houses, placing sling stones in baskets. Elders knelt beside pits, lighting oil with shaking hands. Brea stood at the center square, her bow strung, her eyes sharp. "We are not an army," she said to those beside her. "We are a home. And if they crush it, let them taste curses in every breath they draw." But war is never perfect. From beneath, through a forgotten shaft deep under the old granary, came the crack of boards. A Roman detachment, lost to sight, rose into the center of Homer. They did not shout. They struck. Steel met wood. Flesh met fire. Screams ripped through the morning haze. In the square, Lay saw his brother fall, Kern, pierced through the side. "I got there first," Kern whispered, his hands slick with blood. "Make it count." He smiled, and did not speak again. Lay rose, face streaked with tears and ash. He didn't cry out. He drew his blade and moved with purpose. For Kern. For the root that had been cut. Michal found him. Resonius. The centurion of the east. Bloodied. But standing. They circled 2 storms in a dead calm. Blades clashed. Michal's shoulder gave, torn and red, his blood mixing with dust. But he didn't stop. Resonius struck with precision. But he was tired. And he bled. Then a slip. A flicker. Michal's knife found the gap under the chin strap. Resonius choked, eyes wide. Then fell. And did not rise. Michal knelt gasping, staring at his own hands. Not in triumph. But in understanding. You don't win a mountain. You survive it. At the ridge, Steen raised the horn. Not for alarm. Not for fear. A single, deep note echoed through the valley, low and endless, like the voice of the earth itself. It was not victory. It was presence. We are still here. The Romans, leaderless, scattered. Some fled. Others dropped shields. A few remained, too proud or too dazed to run. But the tide had turned. The mountain had held. By dusk, the fires were low. Homer stood. Scarred. But whole. Brea tended to the wounded. Lay buried his brother with a sling and a knife in his hand. Driss walked the edge of the cliff, staring at the broken weapons littering the lower paths. Michal sat by the signal post, arm wrapped, staring into the distance. Marcus joined him. You lived. We bled. That's what living costs some days. Michal didn't answer. Then he looked down, and touched the earth with his hand. It was warm. They had been few. But they had never been alone. The stones had spoken. The roots had held. And the wind had carried their answer. The mountain breathed again, not with wind, but with silence. Fog still clung to the stones of Homer, curling through alleys where torches had burned bright just days before. Soot smudged the walls. Splinters littered the ground. A broken spear was lodged in a roof. Ash crusted the corners of windows. But the village stood. Not whole, but standing. And that meant everything. One by one, the survivors came. Not called, only drawn. They gathered at the old stone circle, the one older than all names. It was carved into the heart of the village, where the ground felt oldest, thickest, most sacred. Where voices echoed longer, and decisions carved themselves into memory. There, in the center, lay Kern. He was wrapped in mountain wool, dark and coarse. His bow rested at his side, a sling stone in one hand. His boots, scuffed and burnt, still tied tight. Beside him knelt Lay, twin by blood, now alone in breath. He hadn't wept. He hadn't spoken since the fight. He hadn't needed to. His silence said more than grief ever could. Brea stepped into the circle. Her voice, when it came, was like soft flint, warm and cold at once. He didn't fall in vain. He bought us a moment. And in war, a moment is worth everything. The stone does not bury him. It remembers him. And so will we. Lay stood slowly. His hands were steady as he laid down 2 knives, one his own, one his brother's, across the stone. We were born in one breath. Now I speak for both. He stepped back. Driss moved next. The fog parted around him as though the mountain itself recognized its speaker. Not all who die are taken. Some become the voice of the land. The mountains do not choose easily, but when they do not forget. No one clapped. No one cheered. Only the fire cracked beside the circle. And that was enough. By midday, the forge roared again. The smith's hammer rang out, joined by the scrape of stone and the soft rhythm of new thatch being laid. Broken beams were replaced. New ropes pulled into place. The children, some of whom had thrown stones in battle, now carried buckets and tools with just as much purpose. Not because they expected another attack, but because they no longer feared one. A village that fears prepares to hide. A village that remembers prepares to endure. On the ridge above Holmer, Driss stood with Marcus. Below them, the valley slept. Nothing moved but the mist, and the slow, solemn birds drifting between ridges. I thought maybe I could belong here, Marcus said, eyes searching the cliffs. But I carry too much of Rome in my chest. Driss didn't reply. I'll go down the valley. Speak in the lower towns. Not to beg, but to warn. To tell the truth. He turned to Driss, unsure. Should I say you'll fight again? Driss looked westward. The clouds there were dark, hanging low and full. Say this, that the earth does not belong to any man. Only to those it listens to. Marcus nodded. Then I'll speak. And I'll speak carefully. He left without fanfare. No one saw him go but Driss. But the mountain did not stop him. It let him pass. That night they gathered again, not to mourn, but to decide. The stone circle now bore 3 new marks, a fresh knife, a sling stone, and a bundle of burnt cloth, each representing the fallen, the defenders, and the fire they'd survived. Steen stood, his cane firm in the soil. We didn't win in numbers. We didn't crush them. But we're still here. And that means something. He looked at the circle. Now we choose, do we wait for the next column to rise from the mist, or do we carry the stone forward? Brea, arms crossed, voice steady. We are not an empire. But we are memory. If they come again, let them remember this place. Let them know these hills are not the edge of maps, but the beginning of stories. Mikal added quietly. Then we don't just guard Holmer. We become its shield. Its spear. Its name spoken down the slope, not in fear, but in fire. Driss stepped forward. He held no weapon. Only a smooth stone from the gorge, warmed in his palm. We prepare, he said. Not for survival. For meaning. He placed the stone beside Kern's knife. And that was the moment. No more waiting. No more wondering. Just the rhythm of people who now knew they were part of something older, and stronger, than fear. Just before dawn, a scout returned. Dust on his boots. Breath short. He had seen it. A trail of banners in the distance. Southbound. Another march. Another wave. But now, Holmer would not only withstand. It would respond. Autumn had come to Holmer. The trees no longer whispered. Their leaves had already fallen, lying like soft rust-colored feathers across the village paths. The sky was cold glass. The air held the bite of early frost, but also the smell of bread, rich and real, and salt from drying hides. And something deeper. Stillness. Not silence, but peace that had earned its name. Holmer stood. Scarred but whole. The roofs were patched with fresh straw, smoke curling once more from the chimneys. The paths were swept, not of all blood, but enough. Children ran barefoot over packed earth, shouting through the alleys. Laughter echoed where once only war had walked. The central square had changed. In its heart now stood a stone, the same old meeting stone, but carved anew. Not polished. Not perfect. But true. On it, chiseled by careful hands, were names. Not of generals. Not of conquerors. Of those who fell. And those who stood. The potters fired their new batch of jars that week. On one, a wolf had been etched with a sharp nail, mid-howl, back arched, eyes wide. No one said whose hand had done it. But no one needed to. Children played in the lower field. Their game. Romans and shepherds. But now the rules had changed. The shepherds didn't run. They waited. Then turned. They always won. In the hills above, Brea stood beneath an oak, teaching 3 girls how to notch arrows without breaking the shaft. Strength, she told them, is not in the pull. It's in the stillness before it. Mikal no longer ran to fights. He built walls now. Quiet ones. Strong. He nodded more than he spoke. The fire in him hadn't gone out, it had learned how to warm instead of burn. Lay walked alone through the orchard, a basket slung over his back. He talked to the wind sometimes. Told it stories. Told it jokes. He said they were for his brother. And some nights, before sleep, he whispered, "Good night, Kern," as if he still needed to. In the early days of winter's breath, a stranger arrived. Thin. Wrapped in faded red. Carrying a letter sealed in wax marked with a broken eagle. He said nothing. Just handed it to Brea. It was from Marcus. I left. But I left something behind. In the Imperial Cartography halls, there is now a white mark. A blank space. Unclaimed. Beside it, one word. Unwelcome. They say it is sharp. Uncertain. Resistant. They do not say Homer. But they know. You are no longer a place. You are a reminder. And that cannot be burned. Atop the ridge above the eastern pass, Driss stood alone. The sky behind him stretched in bands of gray and gold. Before him, the valley. The broken bridge. The gorge. The river, glinting faintly far below. He held a stone in one hand. Smooth. Unremarkable. From the battlefield. His voice was low. Meant only for the wind. We never screamed, he said. But now they know, the mountains do not stay silent. He knelt, placed the stone at the highest point on the ridge. It sat beside others, old, weathered, watching. When mountains answer, he said, even those who mistake us for silence, hear it. Then he rose. And walked away. That night, Homer breathed like a single chest. One hearth to the next. One story to the next. One heartbeat to the next. They didn't know what would come next. They didn't need to. They had become more than survivors. More than rebels. More than a village. They were a scar the Empire could not erase. A silence it could no longer claim. A mountain that spoke not in words, but in being. Epilogue. Sometime later, years or maybe only seasons, a trader from the south would pass near the slopes of Homer. He'd heard stories, of course. Of a place that turned back the legion. Of a path where iron banners sank into snow. Of a ridge where the air still carried the echo of something stronger than war. He'd ask where to find this place. But the map would show only white. And someone would answer. It's not lost. It's left alone. They called it Homer. But what they meant was memory carved in stone. Roots that never forgot. and a silence that would speak forever.